Thank you so much. Good morning to you all, dear colleagues. It's always good and a real pleasure to be amongst colleagues and friends in not only in the development community, but also all of you very knowledgeable of the food waste and loss issues and challenging. I'm sure even before coming here and during the opening session and the rest of the today, you're going to hear a lot about compelling evidence about the causes and the magnitudes and the consequences of food waste and loss. My personal experience with pre-harvest, in-harvest, and post-harvest losses. Growing up on my parents' farm will always be etched in my memories. So, two are images of unsold food being cleared from the supermarket shelves, let alone the piles of leftovers being thrown away in several restaurants. Food loss and waste have been with us for a long time, and they continue to be an impediment to meeting our zero hunger goal. This is why IFAD and others here today are championing the SDG 12.3. And I just heard some of the colleagues talking about 1, 2, 3. Which is, I believe, is very powerful to advocate. This champion 12.3 calls on us to cut food waste in half and reduce the food loss along the production and supply chain by 2030. As we now shift gears and move the discussion toward practical measures, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about the complexity of this global problem. Reducing food loss and waste, it might seem like a relatively straightforward objective. But as this year's State of Food and Agriculture report notes, the actual implementation is really not simple. The main reason is that the food systems are a complex web connecting many different elements, including the nutrition, the water management, the marine resources, the whole terrestrial ecosystem, the access to food itself, the food prices, and even some cultural heritage. So, as we consider how to reduce food loss and waste, we need to be aware that any action taken in one area may have impact elsewhere in the food systems. We also need better data in order to make sure interventions are targeted and are effective, and that they do not have any unintended negative side effects. We also need to support small-scale farmers. After all, the smallholders produce 50% of all food calories on 30% of the world's agricultural land. Dear colleagues, today I would like to focus my remarks on food loss because in the poor rural communities where IFAD works, losses are quite high, but very little food goes to waste. What isn't eaten or sold is used for animal feed or turned into compost and plugged back into the soil. But bad weather, pests, or disease can force farmers to leave their crops in the field, resulting in food loss. Food is also lost when farmers don't have access to simple harvesting technologies, storage, drying facility, processing, or affordable transport. Poor rural roads make it difficult and costly for farmers to get their produce to the markets. Since childhood, and more recently during several field visits, I have witnessed trucks loaded with farm produce that have broken down on their way to the nearest market. In sub-Saharan Africa, more than 1/3 of the population lives 5 hours away from the nearest market town of 5,000 people. This is a particular problem for fresh fruits and vegetables. Just think what tomatoes packed into wicker baskets will look like after a 5-hour journey down a bumpy dirt road. Certainly, transporting those tomatoes in plastic crates instead of wicker baskets will prevent them from getting crushed. But let us ponder for a sec. If more potatoes get to market, do we think the farmers make more money from the higher volume, or will the financial return go to the traders, the middlemen as we call them, or shall I say, the middle people? And if farmers see no gain, will they see any point investing in the plastic crates? This illustration points us to the need for policies and actions to develop rural infrastructures so farmers can get food safely and in good condition when they arrive to the nearest market. Yet, national strategies addressing food loss are very rare, and often governments lack the expertise and resources to incorporate evidence-based information into their agricultural strategies. An example of how we are addressing this challenge is a joint program with our colleagues from FAO and the WFP here in Rome. This project, which is designed to fill in the knowledge and the policy gaps in 3 African countries, Burkina Faso, DRC, and Uganda. In the first phase, the project carried out the detailed analysis to identify critical loss points for crops along the whole value chain. Then it introduces technologies such as dryers, shellers, plastic silos, and hermetic bags, along with training in post-harvest management to stem the losses. The results of the food loss analysis enabled each country to integrate food loss reduction into its agricultural and development policy framework. At the global level, the project established a community of practice to share knowledge and networking. But this is just one example of the step that we are talking about. Financing is another critical issue. We need to look at how to increase access to rural finance to allow households to invest in food loss reduction, such as using hermetically sealed bags that prevent grain pest infestation during the storage. And we also need to consider how to meet the financial needs of small and medium-sized rural businesses. only 10% of rural communities have access to even the most basic formal financial services. So improving access to financing requires partnership with the private sector and the government. This is why IFAD, recognizing this and together with partners, including the European Union, we have recently launched the ABC Agribusiness Capital to stimulate the private sector investment in small and medium-sized enterprises in the rural areas. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue our discussions on food loss and waste, I will argue that we need to consider how loss reduction fits into the food systems and what we need food systems to deliver. I will argue that we need food systems that are inclusive of the most marginalized members of our societies, that provide sufficient and nutritious food for all, and that contribute to meeting the SDGs, especially the zero hunger and no poverty. As you have heard, and I trust my colleague from FAO may have mentioned also during the first session, a food system summit is likely to be convened by the UN Secretary General in 2021. And we do expect this summit to help build global momentum to address this challenge. And I am sure that issues of food loss and waste will be clearly on the table. One thing that I can say with certainty is that at a time when 820 million children, women, and men go hungry every day, and when increasingly erratic weather is putting food system under pressure, we just cannot afford to look away. All of us have an obligation to be a personal change agent so we can contribute individually and collectively to stop the loss and the waste. So in conclusion, let me thank once again the Vatican and the Rockefeller Foundation for choosing to host a conference on such an important topics. I thank you very much.